All right, guys. What's left in the semester is our last two big adventures. The Trojan Saga, which culminates in the Trojan War, and the last adventure is the Return of the Heroes, which we will cover separately from the Trojan Saga. So, to get started with the Trojan Saga, let me go ahead and move on here. All right, so we have to start kind of with the beginning. So the earliest myths of Troy deal with a little boy, the Prince of Troy, named Ganymede, which you should vaguely remember from earlier in the semester. When Zeus falls in love with Ganymede, he is considered to be the most beautiful of mortals, but he is also a Trojan prince. His father is King Tros, Tros, who is the founder of the city of Troy. So when Zeus kidnaps Ganymede, he pays King Tros, Ganymede's father, with a herd of immortal horses. And it's so these horses that Troy is famous for. And if you remember that Ganymede replaced Hebe as a cupbearer of the gods on Mount Olympus. You'll also recall in the myth of Athena and Pallas that when Athena kills her friend Pallas, in her grief and remorse, she has a wooden statue of Pallas made called the Palladium, and it is placed in Athena's temple in Troy, with the promise that as long as this wooden statue stands in the temple of Troy, the temple of Athena in Troy, that the city would be protected. And then a third myth, which we heard about with Heracles, is the myth of Laomedon, a later king of Troy. Apollo and Poseidon are kind of contracted to build the walls of Troy, the walls that surround the city. And so that helps to explain, when we get later on in the story, why the walls are so impenetrable to the Greeks and they cannot breach the walls until the very end, when the Trojans actually allow the walls to be breached. But you'll also remember that Apollo and Poseidon were promised payment. They were promised to be paid by Laomedon out of those herd of immortal horses. But Laomedon reneges on his agreement, and if you'll remember, Apollo, to avenge his, that cheatingness, that cheat, he sends a plague through Troy, but Poseidon sends a sea monster, similar to what we, saw in Perseus' saga as well. All right, so like we saw with before, Hesione is a princess of Troy, and she is supposed to be sacrificed to the sea monster to save the city. But of course, Heracles rescues her. Remember, he does not actually marry her. He actually gives her to his compatriot Telamon to marry, and that's important because Telamon and Hesione will wind up with the descendants to set up the 10-year war at Troy, right? Namely Podarche or Priam. Okay, so that's the very earliest of the history of Troy. So now we're going to travel to Sparta, because Helen is called Helen of Troy, but actually she is a queen of Sparta. So we have to kind of get her story as well. Okay, so Leda was the queen of Sparta and the wife of King Tandarius. Now, as you see in this picture over here with this swan, Leda was seduced by Zeus when Zeus was in the guise of a swan. In fact, one of the most famous British romantic poems is called Leda and the Swan, and that details this particular affair of Zeus's. Now, she does become pregnant with Zeus's children with demigods. And some versions of the story say that she actually laid an egg. Well, I guess, because she had an affair with a swan. So she lays an egg, and from the egg were hatched the Dioscuri. That is the collective name for the twin sons that she had, Castor and Polydeuces. Now you should remember those because they were heroes of the Argonauts. Castor was a famous horseman, he was great with horsemanship, but Polydeuces was the one who was gifted in boxing. Now, in some versions, they are both sons of Zeus. However, you'll see that changes when we talk about some later versions of this story. So in other versions, she actually laid 2 eggs, each of which contained one child of the god of Zeus, Polydeuces, in one egg, and Helen in the other. And the other egg contained one child, again, by Zeus, and one child sired by her mortal husband, so Castor and Clytemnestra. Okay, so anyway, Castor and Polydeuces are known as the Dioscuri. That's the main thing to remember. All right. They were heroes in several different stories. We didn't get into very much about the Caledonian boar hunt, but they were participants in the Caledonian boar hunt, and then they led an army to Athens when Theseus kidnaps their 10-year-old sister Helen. Hopefully you remember that vaguely from Theseus's saga. And again, as we mentioned before, they also are participants in the saga of Jason and the Argonauts. A second major story that involves the Dioscuri, or Castor and Polydeuces, is with the sons of Aphareus. Okay, so Aphareus. Well, let me backtrack here. All right, so let me start at the beginning. Castor and Polydeuces aspired to marry Phoebe and Hilyra. They are known together as the Leucippides, which means daughters of the white horse. Their father was Leucippus, whose name means white horse. So they aspire to marry Phoebe and Hilyra. However, both women are already betrothed to the Dioscuri's cousins, the twin brothers Lynceus and Idas of Thebes. They are the son of King Tyndareus' brother Aphareus. So remember, Tyndareus is Leda's father, so this would be their grandfather. All right, I know family trees can get kind of messy. So anyway, Castor and Polydeuces do not let the fact that they're already engaged bother them, and in fact they carry the women off to Sparta. The cousins, however, carry out a cattle raid in Arcadia, but they wind up falling out over the division of the cattle. So sometime later, Idas and Lynceus visit their uncle's home in Sparta. Now, the women at this point have already settled with Castor and Polydeuces. So when Lynceus and Idas come to Sparta, their uncle, and Castor and Polydeuces' father, was on his way to Crete, so he leaves Helen in charge of entertaining the guests. And so the guests included the twin cousins and Paris, the prince of Troy. Now, Castor and Polydeuces recognize an opportunity to get revenge against their cousins. I mean, they already got the women, but anyway, they get revenge. So they make an excuse that justifies them leaving the feast and the celebrations, and they set out to steal their cousin's stolen herd of cattle. Idas and Lycaeus eventually go home, leaving Helen alone with Paris, who then carries her off to Troy. So those four cousins, Castor and Polydeuces, Lycaeus and Idas, actually help to set into motion the events that give rise to the Trojan War. Now, the death of Castor and the choice of Polydeuces here, this is, like I said, another version of their story, a later version, where they are not both demigods, just Polydeuces is. And so Polydeuces, alone as a son of Zeus, was offered the gift of immortality, but he agreed only on condition that his half-twin Castor share the honor. So Zeus agrees, but the pair has to spend alternate days in the underworld to appease the fates and the gods of the dead. The Dioscuri also receive a place amongst the stars as the constellation Gemini, or the twins, and their alternations between the heavens and the underworld may refer to the cycle of their constellation. Their constellation is only visible in the heavens for 6 months of the year. All right. In the end, Castor and Polydeuces are associated with seamen, as you can see in the Homeric hymn number 33, if you're curious. The pair was regarded as patrons of sailors, and they were said to appear to sailors as St. Elmo's fire. Now, St. Elmo's fire happens when you would see kind of like lightning dance along the ropes at the tops of masts on ships. It's pretty cool. You can Google a YouTube video about that. And of course, they were also associated with horsemanship. That is, of course, because Castor was known as a accomplished horseman. Later on in Rome, as well as Sparta, they had their own cult, and their cult was open to only men, and these men would ride white steeds. The Dioscuri were highly revered in the Roman Empire, and in fact they had a beautiful temple dedicated to them in Rome. The last little piece here on this particular slide is the birth of Clytemnestra and Helen. Clytemnestra will become the wife of Agamemnon, the leader of the Greeks. Helen was considered the most beautiful of women, and she marries Menelaus, the king of Sparta, they had one child together. And again, when the Trojan prince, Paris, visits Sparta when her husband is away, he seduces her and persuades her to come to Troy. And it is her leaving her husband to go to Troy that sparks the excursion, the expedition to get her back. All right. So moving on here with a little bit more background about Paris. Paris was actually fated to be trouble pretty much from the beginning. His mother, Hecuba, the queen of Troy, dreamt one night that she would give birth to a fire that would destroy the city. And so, when Paris is born, in order to try to avoid that fate, they entrust him to a shepherd who was supposed to put him up on Mount Ida and leave him exposed so that he would die. After 5 days, the shepherd returns to Mount Ida and he finds the child is still alive and being fed by a she-bear. So he takes the boy, brings him down off the mountain, and raises him alongside his own child and calls him Paris. He's the one who names him Paris. We'll talk about his Trojan prince name later. Later, Paris will show up in the city of Troy and earn recognition through participation in skilled warrior type of games, and Cassandra, his sister, will declare him to be her brother, along with a few other seers. And if you'll remember, Cassandra was the princess of Troy who jilted Apollo, and he had given her the gift of prophecy, but then he cursed it so no one would believe it. So at this point, they still believe her, and King Priam receives him as his son, and supposedly he's a youth of unsurpassed beauty. Now, we'll pause here to go to the next, a second video, and we'll get a little bit more about the backstory of Paris before he comes back to Troy and is recognized as a prince.